Monsieur Anber.
Greetings, Monsieur Cassava. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for being here again this evening with the classic. Is that a new gift there? The Joe Louis
That
Brown.
was for my birthday, as a birthday present from the missus.
Yeah, hey.
My Joe Louis brown bomber shirt.
And we're also joined this week by our favorite guest, our regular guest, IceMan himself, John Scully. Ice, thank you for doing this.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I see a little bit, Ice is Mr. Technology, right? So I'm seeing a bit of his thumb imprint while he's holding the phone.
Hold on.
Okay, well, Matt, I got to tell you, I don't know if Scully told us this, if he told you this story before, but it was only up until a couple of years ago that he realized that computers had sound.
Yeah.
Russ, Scully may not be the best with technology. You may not be the best with memory because you actually told this story when we had Ice the first time.
Okay, good. Well, he's told me before, so I don't know if he had told you. And he only discovered WhatsApp, a year ago maybe, that I told him about WhatsApp, and he said, "You can call anywhere in the world for free."
Yeah, but you know what? I'm just going to open this up here for just a second. Because you're going in that direction. I think sometimes that we've become so over-reliant on technology. Nobody knows how to get anywhere now without a GPS, and nobody knows a cell phone number. And these are things we used to do. So sometimes I think, as great as technology is, and as great as the tools, and we can do this now because of technology tonight, sometimes I think, we had to actually use our brains a little bit more in the past. And I think sometimes we've been lazy now with what's going on.
Hey, I'll tell you one thing right now. I have no idea, and I mean no clue what my home phone number is. I don't honestly, I don't have a clue. I have no idea.
It's funny. You ask somebody for directions. You don't even ask anymore. And when you ask some, because it's on your phone, you use a GPS and that's it. And like when you did, the guy would say, turn left. And you say, well, is that east or west? And no clue. No clue.
No. Zero.
Zero. So, gentlemen, the reason why I wanted to also have Ice on this evening, because there's been a lot of stuff that's happened since we've last gathered, me and Russ, since we've last spoke last week. We had the fight against Dillian Whyte and Alexander Povetkin over the weekend. It was pretty much the only noteworthy boxing fight. And we have an upcoming fight this Saturday between Carl Frampton, who will try to win a belt at 130 pounds against Jamal Herring. But short of that, there was it was a free-for-all. The floodgates have completely opened with these exhibitions and some of the craziness that's going on in boxing. So just to recap, and we'll get to this throughout the evening, but some of the topics and some of the news that broke since last Friday. De La Hoya is coming back in an exhibition this summer, he announced. Okay, we have Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. fighting Anderson Silva, former MMA UFC fighter, in a boxing exhibition this summer. We have Miguel Cotto and Juan Manuel Marquez, two Hall of Fame fighters, apparently coming back to fight an exhibition this summer. There's also an exhibition, of course, now that was announced between Marco Antonio Barrera and Jesus Soto Caras in Mexico, also at some point, or maybe California over the summer. I don't know even where to begin right now with what has happened, because I remember, Russ, when Tyson fought Roy Jones, and it was a great event. It was a lot of fun, but you said be careful here, because once you use the term exhibition, you don't have to have the same rules and regulations anymore. And it's a free-for-all to make money and to kind of circumvent, the commission rules. So I don't know where you want to begin with all of these information. Do you want to address the real fight first, or do you want to address some of this craziness that got announced in the last week or so?
Well, let me add one more to the craziness. And I don't know if this was an April Fool's joke or not, but apparently Frank Bruno has just announced that he's been offered £2 million to fight, I believe it said Mike Tyson. So he says, how can I turn that down? So
could be an April Fool's. That's for, we're recording this on April Fool, but some of these other ones are definitely legitimate. And I don't know where to begin.
Let me say, also apparently Camacho Jr. is going against Chavez. He's in Mexico right now.
Senior right now.
Yeah, against Senior.
I mean, look, I think it was fun to see Tyson Roy do it, and I think there's some intrigue with some of these events. But what I'm afraid of right now is that we're going to lose track of what are the real fights, and all these events are going to come and just kind of, overpollute or over, it's going to take away the spotlight from the fighters who should. I'm all for exhibitions if they're well placed and well timed, but I didn't think it would become so rampant and a trend this quickly. And, with these many fighters wanting to come back and make a quick payday.
I can't see any sustainability in it. Eventually, the thrill is going to rub off, right? If it just keeps happening with everybody, no one's going to care. I mean, it was great with Roy and Tyson because really you picked two guys who were legends in the game, like two of the biggest names ever in the history of boxing, coming back at an advanced age to get into the ring against each other. I'm not sure that, there's any merit, or I don't even know how it's even possible that Anderson Silva and Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. are allowed to have a matchup that's not a real boxing match. Like you can just, all you've got to do is call it an exhibition and that's it. Suddenly, you're allowed to do that, and athletic commissions have to let you do it because they have no grounds to stop it from happening. But who cares? Who are people going to buy that? Is there an interest of seeing Anderson Silva and Julio Cesar Chavez? No. Do you want to see certain legends? Maybe, it's a nice thing, but I have no interest in seeing Oscar De La Hoya coming back. Scully?
Not at all. I mean, why? It's a with Roy and Mike, it was like a one-time thing, and it's like, all right, that's cool, but you keep doing it. Now it's going to be like, all right, I want to see somebody get knocked out. I want to see, Tito Trinidad come back and try to decapitate one of you guys, but I don't want to see you guys boxing for 8 rounds and having fun and then laughing after. That's going to wear out quick. That's going to grow old quickly, I believe.
And look, I just want to say one thing about De La Hoya, who was the first one to kind of launch this news cycle of the past week of these exhibitions. He's in shape. He says he's taking it seriously, but when he last fought against Manny Pacquiao, he took a massive beating. And I don't know how many of these fighters coming back for these exhibitions. Mike, like you said, there was a mystique for Mike Tyson and Roy, and they look good doing the exhibition. And Tyson, Holyfield, if they fight a third time in that exhibition setting, maybe it works. But for a lot of these other fighters, including De La Hoya, to me, you're kind of making a mockery of your career by coming back and just having these exhibitions when there's other fighters that you could be promoting. There's other fights that deserve attention. And we know nowadays, unfortunately, because a lot of this to me comes from the wrestling fan background of, because their names, because there's mystique behind it, they're going to want to pay maybe, and it's going to draw casual fans or sports fans or different crowds, but it's going to make it even harder for the real fights to get attention. That's kind of where I'm at right now. And I just don't know if you think do fighters care about tarnishing their legacy, or do you think because it's an exhibition and everybody's doing it, it's okay and it's fine and it doesn't matter?
I'm kind of split on this, in that I don't think anybody has the right to tell you what you can or cannot do. I think as long as you're a human, you're allowed to do something. And, if you're healthy and you pass the tests and whatnot, that's fine. I think like in the case of Roy and Tyson, it was two guys in their advanced ages going against each other. It wasn't like Tyson was trying to come back and fight Anthony Joshua, or it wasn't a case of Roy trying to come back and fight, Usyk at cruiserweight or whatever, it wasn't that. They were staying within their zone. De La Hoya still has not answered who he would fight. So I think we have to wait and see where we can put that into what sort of perspective. But I think if you think that there's money to be made, then do it for the better good. Do it for charity. Do it to help people. But you're supposed to be a promoter, taking care of your promotional company and promoting the fighters that you have under contract. You're actively involved in boxing on a day-to-day basis. Why aren't you taking care of your own business instead of being back in the gym at the age of, 48, did they say? Or what's
De La Hoya?
Yeah.
No, I'll confirm, but I think it's 48.
Something like that. And now you want to come back for a July date. I mean, for the money, I'm amazed to see how there's a revenue stream for this. Scully?
Well, they're not getting any money from me. I'll tell you that much. I mean, I'm not nostalgic in that way. I'm just not. I've seen those guys at their best. I've seen them when they were the elite. So to go backwards and watch, it's like old timers day at Yankee Stadium. And it's almost sad in a way because you watch like Yogi Berra, he'd be out there like in the 80s and, he'd be trying to field the ball and you could see like he couldn't even hardly bend over. He couldn't throw the ball more than like 40 feet. And it was more sad than exciting to watch. You're watching a guy who's literally a shell of himself trying to do something that he did 30 years earlier, very, very well. So you're not seeing, people almost, I think subconsciously, initially they think, man, I'm going to see Oscar De La Hoya. And it's like, no, you're going to see a 48-year-old guy who hasn't fought in 12 years or whatever it is. And he's going to go out there at 48 and he's going to look like a 48-year-old guy doing what he does. So you're not going to get what you think you're going to get.
But if he does it against another 48-year-old guy and they do an exhibition, I really don't have a problem with that. What I have a problem with is how do they think how does this generate revenue? Like, how can there be that interest that you're willing to do it? If it's true what's said about Frank Bruno, that they're offering him £2 million, right, they've got to get that money from somewhere to pay him.
Well, that's what I mean. They can do it. That's fine. But I'm not paying to watch it.
But somebody must be.
That's what I'm saying. But who?
I don't know.
It's not boxing people, like real boxing fans. It's people. I always say, it's like my brother. My brother thought McGregor was going to kill Mayweather. He thought he was too big and too strong because he doesn't know. He just doesn't know. And I told him before the fight, I said, Mayweather's going to play with McGregor. But it's because of people like you that this is even happening. And they're even going to make that money because there's people like you who have no idea what you're looking at. And those are the people that are driving that market. Real boxing people aren't excited about seeing De La Hoya. They're not. I don't believe that at all. I'm not going to watch it. I wouldn't pay anything to watch that fight because I've already seen him at his best. I'm not nostalgic. Like, you go see a rock band, at the Civic Center and they have an oldies review. And 40 years ago, they had the #1 hit in the world. And now they're there and their voices are gone. And that's not fun to me. I'd rather listen to the old tapes and hear them at their best.
But Ice is right, though, Russ, about there's so much of a crowd that's emerging of the internet crowd, the wrestling fan base, some of the casual combat sports fans who just want to see events. They want to see big names. Some of them they might have not even seen in their prime, but they hear that they were great fighters and they think there's still going to be that appeal. And it's just a reality. But what's happening is because usually fighters who are making comebacks and fighting well past their prime, we've seen it in boxing. But now instead of having to fight real fights and take a beating, they're saying, hold on a second here. I don't have to come back and actually fight legitimate fighters. I can just do these exhibitions, make even maybe more money and not get hurt. Because guys used to always come back past their prime and you're like, oh no, is he fighting again? Really? Like, we can't believe it. Even Sergio Martinez, Russ, who's a great fighter that you've worked with, decided to make a comeback about 2 years ago, is fighting fights against real fighters in Argentina and in Spain and other places. Really, nobody's noticing. He might say, now, wait a second, why am I doing this instead of fighting exhibitions to make money? And it just seems like I don't know, like you said, though, at one point, it's going to be one too many. They're going to make money because the Tyson Jones pay-per-view generated so much money. It opened the eyes to everyone. But at one point, it's going to be one too many. And people are going to say, you know what? We've seen enough. We get it. Time for the next thing.
But that's why I say, you keep repeating the thing of make money, make money, make money. My question is where's this stream coming from? Where is this massive interest that suddenly has sparked these guys into saying, we're going to do exhibitions. We're going to do exhibitions. And soon they're going to start giving belts for these exhibitions. Honorary belts are going to start getting handed. Like, this is now going to become an exhibition roadshow. There's going to be the exhibition rankings. There's going to be the interim exhibition championship belt.
Silver.
Silver. Yeah. This is what's going to be, it's going to be, I think just the example Scully gave for Old Timers Day, it's the same thing like when you see the Legends of Hockey here in Canada, and it's a one-time affair where you get an opportunity to get on your feet and applaud the heroes of your youth as they go back and do their thing. They play a pickup game. Of course, you're not expecting them to do that, but it's you actually go not for the game, but more for the introduction and the fanfare and the videos that they show when they introduce them to remember the past. And it's more like honoring them, which I like that. I like that. But this just seems, but these guys, they're not making gazillions of dollars doing this. You know what I mean? They do it because they love the game. So if you turned around and said to me, De La Hoya's coming back because he wants to make money to raise money for a hospital in California or for boxing or what, you know, he's raising money to give to people and we should come out and support the event, I'd say great. But when this is just a cash grab where you're trying to, avoid the regulations of professional boxing, not have to fight somebody under professional grounds, call it an exhibition. Commission doesn't have to do anything. Technically, they don't have a say in the matter, and yet they let themselves be there because they want to be involved in the event. And you start charging ticket prices and pay-per-view for it, and people pay for that. I say, where are we going with this? How can this be possible? We're having a rough time selling real fights of real champions who don't even want to fight each other. And we're putting our attention and media, and we're here talking about these guys that have stopped fighting 12 years ago.
Yeah.
I don't get it.
But Ice is right. I'll finish on this point on the exhibitions because Ice is right about people who thought McGregor was going to beat Mayweather. And I've been getting text messages from friends of mine who follow the sport of boxing from a distance, not really who are in the sport and really know it. And they're texting me, hey, did you see this? De La Hoya's coming back. And they're not texting me for when there's actual legitimate fights like Carl Frampton who's fighting this Saturday. Right. These things in boxing scene and the websites are all reporting these exhibitions and they're covering it and they're getting attention. So it's getting clicks somewhere. Somehow this is getting more attention than the actual legitimate fighters. To me, I thought, okay, it was fun once in a while. But if this is going to be rampant as the last week where it just seems like every day you're waking up and somebody else is coming back to fight an exhibition, I'm like, are we really going to live this now? Nothing surprises me anymore, but it just disappoints me that we're at this stage where it's just out of control to make a quick buck.
Yeah.
And let's get to some news, though, that real legitimate fights that are being rumored and discussed. The one that really kind of stood out this week is Terence Crawford fighting Manny Pacquiao. And that, to me, in a legitimate fight is very interesting. Now, of course, it's not a done deal. It's reported to maybe take place June. Mike Coppinger of The Athletic, who's been on the podcast before, reported it himself that the negotiations are underway from Pacquiao discussing with, Bob Arum, his former promoter, trying to have maybe his final big fight against Crawford. And if he does accept that fight without any exhibition ruling, but an illegitimate fight, I got to give credit for Pacquiao because it's a heck of a risk fighting the best fighter pound for pound, and he'll be the underdog Pacquiao for probably the first time in a fight since Mayweather. Your thoughts if that fight comes to fruition? If we can't get Crawford-Spence, at least we're happy with Crawford-Pacquiao.
You got to hand it to Arum for being able to pull that off, for Top Rank to be able to do that, because for whatever reason, they can't make the Spence fight. And I'll tell you what, if Crawford beats Pacquiao, they'll never make the Spence fight because Crawford's going to want the bigger end of the money on this because he's going to have had the better win on it. And it's going to just make for a mess of these two guys ever fighting again. And it's crazy that a fight like this would happen prior to Spence and Crawford fighting each other.
100%. It's amazing. Pacquiao has been, I believe they said he's the first guy, he's been a world champion in 4 different decades. Did you read that?
Yeah.
This is bizarre. And he's, it's insane. And, but you got to give the guy credit. I mean, he was knocked out, viciously, 8 years ago. And, I thought when he got knocked out, when he lost to Bradley, and then he got knocked out cold, I said the Mayweather fight's off. It doesn't mean anything now. And it still generated a gazillion dollars. And I'm like, the guy lost the decision and got knocked out on his face. And now here it is 7 or 8 years later, and he's going to fight a killer. Love Pacquiao or hate him, which I don't think anybody would hate him. But man, this freaking guy in his 40s is fighting Crawford. Nobody would do that. Nobody.
No one wants to fight Crawford now.
Right. Like Pacquiao is a special man. He's a special human being. You know, nobody in the world would blame. We wouldn't blame him for not fighting Crawford. We wouldn't do that.
Nobody would, of course not.
Right. And look at it. He's still like a young guy. Like he has that mentality. Like I appreciate him. I respect him more than, and I won't even name guys, but I respect him a lot more than I do other people, because he's not looking for easy stuff here. I mean, this freaking guy.
No, you know, he takes his fight seriously.
Oh, right, for sure.
And maybe that's why, though, the fight isn't signed or isn't finalized yet. Like, I'm still skeptical that this actually happens. But if it does, it proves that Pacquiao is still very much interested in fighting the best. But because at one point, Pacquiao was thinking about fighting McGregor. That apparently was not just a rumor, but it was actually legitimate. But McGregor gets knocked out in the UFC, so that fight doesn't happen. He wanted to fight Ryan Garcia, but in the exhibition, and that didn't happen. So look, he's trying to get the biggest payday to get on his way out. And Crawford would probably say, thank you very much, because he's been waiting for that big significant fight that's going to draw casual fan interest. He's definitely respected amongst the boxing hardcore, but based on his willingness or not his, you know, maybe he sometimes he's a bit more reserved personality. He doesn't do as much media as other fighters do. I just don't know. I think that maybe for him, it's like a blessing in disguise if he gets this fight. Because does anybody here think that Crawford would lose to Pacquiao at this stage of Pacquiao's career?
Listen, I think before I answer that, Crawford, this is a great opportunity for him, because, you know, they've been in some embroiled discussions with Top Rank of not getting the big fights that he wants and commanding the money that he wants, etc., and wants the big paydays. And you just got him the biggest payday he could possibly make. Like, maybe the Spence fight generates more money, but Pacquiao brings numbers that are, you know, I don't know if they're Canelo-like, but they're massive numbers. And, you know, that's a great opportunity for Crawford to get that. And Crawford is risking a lot, the same way that Keith Thurman risked it, you know, in fighting Pacquiao. I mean, think about that. Pacquiao beat Keith Thurman, you know, like it's crazy. Like it's a prime guy, you know, who's a champion fighting an older version of a Manny Pacquiao who, like Scully says, has suffered defeat, been knocked out. He's in his 40s and he won, you know, and he's champion of the world now at 147 pounds and started boxing when he was 106 pounds, you know, like it's professionally, it's crazy that he's doing that. So I think it's massive for Crawford, and it's massive for Pacquiao, and Crawford cannot afford a loss. And you have to think that this is not a walk in the, I don't think this is a walk in the park for Crawford by any stretch. You know, like he's in a fight, right, Scully?
Listen, here's the thing. After Pacquiao lost to Mayweather, people said, oh, he's all washed up. And I go, no, like, wait till, and when he came back, he looked good and everything. And then when he fought Thurman, you know, a lot of people thought he was biting off way more than he could chew. He was going to get knocked out. Thurman's a big puncher. I was like, listen, if I didn't know anything about Pacquiao and I had seen all his recent fights since he fought Mayweather, if I didn't know who he was and you showed me his fights, I'd go, man, this guy's really good. Who is he? Like, this guy's nice. Forget about his age. Forget about anything. This guy can fight. I mean, his last couple fights, he looks fine. He doesn't look 40. He doesn't look at the 40s at all. Crawford better not sit there and think he's fighting an old man. Look, if Crawford goes out there and wipes him out, fine. He'll be at his best to do it. But if he thinks he's gonna fool around and you know, oh, I'm just too good for this guy, this old guy. Old guys now are not the same as old guys in the 80s and the 70s. It's a different era. When Muhammad Ali fought Larry Holmes, he was only 38 years old. He looked like he was 100. And even before that, when he fought Norton at 36, he looked like he was 100. He couldn't even move. Like, his movement compared to 10 years earlier was like an old man. All those guys, Tommy Hearns, all of them. you
Yeah,
know,
but they were
it's
much
just
more active though, right? They had more fights more frequently. They had 15-round fights. They had brutal sparring sessions and training camps and the recovery period. Like it
yeah,
wasn't.
but no, not necessarily. No, those guys at the end of the Chris Ray Leonard didn't fight often. Tommy Hearns wasn't fighting often. They were fighting 2 times a year, the same like this, 3 times tops. It's just that people are getting older. They're looking better, older, longer, and they're getting bigger. And I don't mean, if people say, well, they're bigger and stronger. I say, listen, a middleweight in 1910 is the same size as a middleweight now. He's 5'10", 160 pounds. But heavyweights, guys are astronomical. They're huge compared to back in the day. Joe Frazier would look like a child next to Klitschko. He would look like a baby. He wouldn't even be able to compete. He'd just be a little man next to him. Football players.
So with Tyson.
Right, all of them. They're just small. You know, they're small. They're little guys. You know. So, but my point is, guys like Pacquiao, they're phenomenons. You know, they're staying active, and you could see in everything he does and says. He's a professional. He stays sharp. He does what he does. And you know, Spence or any of these guys, they better not think like, you know, don't like if you go in with a guy, you ever see, like, you'll see a guy, Marlon Starling used to do this a lot. Mucci used to do this a lot, where he'd fight a guy, and before the fight, he would talk about how the guy wasn't that good. Like, I've had Mucci's famous thing was, I have more knockouts than this guy's had fights. And I remember a reporter saying, listen, Marlon should talk these guys up, you know, talk them up, so that way when you beat them, you feel like you beat somebody. Because if you tell everybody the guy was terrible and then you knock him out, well, who'd you beat? You know, so my point is, you know, now with going against Pacquiao, these guys better not, you know, and Keith might have made that mistake subconsciously where, I'm fighting this old guy, you know, when I clip him, I'm going to hurt him. And listen, this guy is a beast, man. He's a different breed of fighter. And, you know, so I think there, you know, I would assume at the end of the day, if I had to bet $5, I'd bet on Crawford, but I wouldn't feel comfortable betting $100. You know what I mean? I wouldn't feel that confident, you know?
I just want to correct something you said when you said earlier that a 5'10" middleweight in 1910 was the same, you know, this is the same size as a middleweight today. And I think that's a fallacy. That's a complete lie, because right now, Pacquiao might be one of the few fighters right now, today, who could actually fight in the weight class that he is champion in if he had to weigh in on the same day. But I've seen Terence Crawford up close, and I've seen, God rest his soul, Marvin Hagler up close. On fight day, Terence Crawford is the size of Marvin Hagler. Right. But he weighs in, you know, 36 hours before, you know, and makes a welterweight limit, drained to skin and bone, and then shows up, you know, at over 160 pounds on fight night. So it's right now, you know, I think that's the one thing that we cannot compare when we talk about great middleweights, great light heavyweights even, of course, but that's visible to see. But those guys are not in the weight classes. The other day I was watching a clip of when Eddie Mustafa Muhammad knocked out Marvin Johnson for the title. And when you look at them and you look at somebody like Beterbiev today, it's not the same size. Like, it's a massive difference. These guys look like super middleweights of today. And that's really what they are. You know what I mean? That's really what they are actually. The super middleweights of today would all be in the light heavyweight class if they had to weigh in on the same day. So
right.
But we've known this, Russ. It's ever since they've decided to take away same day like weigh-ins. We know about that aspect of it. But in the size difference, though, are you saying Pacquiao would still be able to nullify the size difference of Crawford? I just don't see it. And for Crawford, if he doesn't get the Pacquiao fight, though, who is he going to fight because of the promotional issues? Is he going to be able to make a fight against a guy like Sean Porter or Errol Spence? doesn't seem that way.
That's the sad thing, is that there's fights for him to be had, even if he didn't fight Pacquiao. And like John said, you wouldn't even blame Pacquiao for not fighting Crawford. But there's so many welterweights out there that are available to Crawford, and they're not making those fights. And it's all about a promotional contract if you're with PBC or if you're with Top Rank, and they're almost like, holding him out.
But it's not just because Wilder and Fury were able to fight each other, but besides the fact being on two different promotional entities, I think a lot of it has to do with the fighters themselves as well. Because if they're going to not necessarily push the envelope and risk a very tough fight and their legacy against a guy like Errol Spence, but I can still make good money fighting other guys I have an easier time beating. I think there's a little bit of that in play as well. But if Crawford does not fight Manny Pacquiao, I don't know who he's going to fight of significance, because all the other fighters seem to be on the PBC side of things, and right now no negotiation. So I think it would be a great fight for boxing this summer if Crawford Spence would be great, of course, but if Crawford and Pacquiao end up fighting each other.
No,
but you think about, I always think in these terms of today, I always think about Ray Leonard from 1979 to 1981 in a just under 2-year span. He fought Benitez, Duran twice, and Hearns, and a couple other guys, but those four, I mean, there was no hesitation. Like he went for the killer right away. Like, I want to fight the killer, the best, Tommy Hearns, these guys today, from what I can see, they would go nowhere near Tommy Hearns. They would not be mentioning his name. And Ray went after all of them, like in succession. We need that mentality. And I think Floyd is partly to blame for the whole zero, the undefeated record and all these type of things, and maximizing your potential and earnings, which I understand to a degree. But I mean, the mentality, it doesn't seem like in many ways there's not true fighters. There's very few true fighters. Like, they want to fight the best at any cost and make the fight, tell their promoter, I don't care, just make the fight. It just seems like everybody's trying to circumvent everybody.
And Pacquiao's one of those guys. I mean, he didn't have to fight Juan Manuel Marquez 4 times.
Right.
Did he win the first 3? Like, did he win the first 3?
He won
a draw.
By close decision, 1 split, 1 majority, and then he ends up losing by knockout, of course, against Marquez, the 4th.
But I mean, like, there's who else has fought the same guy? What fighter today has fought the same guy 4 times? You can't even barely get a rematch. We can't get Loma to fight Teofimo. Like, it's crazy. You can't get a rematch, and these guys fought each other 4 times.
Right.
One guy who is fighting a lot this year and is the pound for pound recognized best fighter and is getting interest. Unfortunately, he still draws eyeballs despite the fact he's fighting legitimate opponents and not these crazy exhibitions, is Canelo Alvarez. And the reason why I'm bringing up Canelo, he's fighting Billy Joe Saunders in May. Intriguing fight. I don't know how much interest is I hope it draws more interest than Jake Paul's next fight in April, but I have my doubts. But anyways, for the boxing fans, we have Canelo Saunders. And the reason I bring up Canelo is that people have been saying that one of the matchups they think, the hardcore boxing fans, that is the best on paper to make right now is Canelo Alvarez against Arthur Beterbiev. But one guy who disagrees, and Gilbert Ramirez, who used to be a champion at 168, is moving up to 175. He thought Beterbiev looked dull. He looked flat in his last performance for us that you were in Russia for against Adam Dennis. Now, my question is, does your opinion of Beterbiev possibly fighting Canelo, was it altered at all based on the result of Arthur 2 weeks ago? Or do you think it does not change that performance? It shouldn't change your anticipation for Beterbiev Canelo fight if it does happen, because Arthur wants it. It would be one of the best fights on paper to make.
Scully, do you want to take it first, or you want me to answer first?
You go first.
I think that we can all agree that this wasn't a star-studded performance from Arthur. This wasn't his greatest fight. He was under a lot of, strangely enough, hometown pressure for never having fought in that home where he's originally from. This was a homecoming for him. He hadn't fought in 17 months. I think there was a lot of things going up. So it certainly was not, the best performance of his career. Does he have all the necessary tools to give Canelo all the trouble in the world? Absolutely. He's a world-class fighter since he's been an amateur. He has fought the best in the world in both games, amateurs right up through the Olympics and pros right up to a world championship fight, and fought them early in his career. I don't think there is any doubt whatsoever that that is an interesting matchup, and he can be a guy who can cause the problems. No doubt. He has everything to cause the problems for Canelo. Canelo's a great fighter. If Canelo neutralizes and nullifies all the great things that Arthur can do, this could be a long night for Arthur. You know, the same way that if he drills Canelo and Canelo feels that kind of power coming from Arthur Beterbiev, who right now, you know, with his 100% knockout record, I think there's him and Berlanga have got that, you know, same knockout kind of record. Although
position, right? Arthur's a champion. Yeah.
Fair enough, but they have all knockouts on their record. You know, he might be the hardest puncher in boxing right now. You know, that says something. But in order for that to work, you've got to hit the target. And Canelo, as Scully and I have talked about often, Canelo just seems to be hitting stride in becoming so complete as a fighter that you can almost, and this, you don't say this about many fighters, but when you say you can't hit a guy with a handful of rice, that's the ultimate compliment.
Yeah. Yeah. He's especially if you watch his fights and, you know, like against Triple G and different things, and they show certain sequences in slow motion. He's like the Matrix. I mean, his movements and his reactions. I mean, he's awesome. I mean, I give him all the credit in the world. My thing with Arthur, Arthur obviously fights to the level of his opposition sometimes. Like when Arthur steps his game up, he's a huge problem. I'll say this, and I'm sure Russ noticed this, but that guy, Adam Deans, that we just fought, he was very sneaky. He was very tricky. Like he would be there waiting, and he was game, and then all of a sudden he would explode with big shots. Arthur had, you know, being in there, I'm sure Arthur realized, I got to be careful. This guy's out of nowhere. He's just exploding with some desperation, 2 or 3 punch combinations, you know, as hard as he can, and you never knew when it was coming. So Arthur couldn't just go in recklessly. But regardless, subconsciously, especially when you're at that level, it's like when you go in with certain people, regardless of what they tell you, like you got to be on your game, you got to be on your P's and Q's, you know, you got to be alert. But, you know, it's different fighting Tyson than it is fighting, you know, a 10-2 heavyweight from Missouri. You know, it's just different. Like, and if Arthur goes in with Canelo, he's not going to be having a layoff. He's going to be sharper, just psychologically, mentally, emotionally. He's going to be sharper against it, just like he proved when he fought Gavadzik. I mean, that was a stellar performance. Nobody could say it wasn't world class. I mean, he was almost perfect in that fight after the first 3 rounds. So I don't, you know, anyone who I think the guy who was it that said he looked average, or
Ramirez.
Oh, Ramirez. Okay, now part of that is him hyping it up. Part of that is wishful thinking, you know, trying to convince himself that this guy is human. You know what I mean? That's what fighters do. And I'm sure if he was actually in the ring with Arthur, he wouldn't feel the same way. You know, watching a fighter and being in with him is 2 different things. So, you know, I think Arthur's reputation and record speaks for itself. His power, regardless, his power is second to none, period. Like you feel that power is the greatest equalizer. All these things, well, Arthur does this and Arthur's that, and he's slower and he's methodical. And as soon as he hits you, all those things go right out the window, and you're just trying to survive and not die. You know what I mean? So, you know, it's easy to say something watching a guy, but being in there and executing is a different thing.
And here's the thing, Russ, if I just may here, Canelo, ever since he defeated Golovkin in the second fight, you could tell the confidence he comes into the ring. It's like he knows that he's not afraid, first of all, because of his defensive skill, but also he doesn't really fear the power of any of his opponents since Golovkin. Arthur would make his game face, I think his confidence, the swagger that Canelo is now coming into the ring, facing these opponents that he knows he's going to beat, makes a difference. And now if he fights Arthur Beterbiev, he has to really respect that power more than any fighter he's faced since Golovkin. And I think that's why he's going to probably stay away as long as he can from this fight, unify the super middleweight division, see what happens. But I would love to see it, but I think he knows that fight's a different mentality because all his moves, upper body, if he makes the wrong calculation on the inside, Arthur doesn't let him do it. It's a different ball game for Canelo that he has not faced any type of power like that since Golovkin. Arthur probably hits even stronger just by his physical mass of being bigger than Golovkin.
Well, Matthew, I think that I think he can do all the things he wants to do and execute his style that he wants to execute against Arthur. But like Scully said, it's the power that's the equalizer. That's the one thing he has to solve. I think he can handle everything else. I don't think he'll get into a wrestling match with Arthur. I don't think he'll get into whatever he doesn't want to do, he won't do. So he has to focus on not getting hit with that, because if he gets hit with that power and he gets hurt with that power, now it's Beterbiev's opportunity to impose his will. But until that point, it's going to be Canelo dictating the fight. Arthur might put the pressure and try to get to him, but if he starts swinging at midair, and the guy's not there anymore and he's getting hit with shots, Canelo doesn't hit as hard as Beterbiev, but he certainly hits hard enough to get your respect and get your attention and hurt you. You can't just take it and think that it's nothing. There's something on those shots. So, I think it's a dangerous fight for both, but the equalizer in that fight is the power of Beterbiev. If Beterbiev was not the puncher that he is, maybe he might not be champion now, or he'd be a contender only, but there wouldn't be the interest in the fight. That power is what makes it so interesting. The one guy that has that strength to do that is Arthur Beterbiev. And credit to Ramirez. Nobody else, you've never heard any other light heavyweight say, Beterbiev, I'll take him, no problem. Nobody says that. No, they pretend he doesn't exist, right? Like he's not there. They don't mention him in interviews. They don't talk about him. Nothing. Like they just figure if we ignore him long enough, maybe he'll go away. But
Ramirez, here's the asterisk. Ramirez, after saying all this about Arthur, stated in the same interview on BoxingScene.com that I still rather fight Bivol right now. I'm going after. Look, I want to get to the fight of the heavyweights in the landscape before we go. But before I do this, we do have – go ahead, Mr. Anber.
Before you go to that, I think we should definitely – I don't know if you're planning on doing it, but Jamal Herring and Carl Frampton – and I hate that it's this late that we've done this, but they deserve a mention. These are – yeah?
This is what I want to get to. And the reason why I want to lead up to this fight before is that if you're interested in betting on this fight – well, we have a sponsor for you that you might be interested in hearing about.
Yeah, I was wondering when you were going to mention that.
Well, that's the thing, Russ. So I guess this is show we're alive here, and we don't have the off mic and giving you a direction here. But don't be in a rush. I'm getting to it. It's Canada's newest online sportsbook and casino. It's Bet99.com. So if you check them out, you can check their risk-free in-live bet bonuses, the player props, the bet builder, I should say, the risk-free live bet bonuses that I've already mentioned. But what you do here is if you use the code BOXING99, you get a sports welcome offer, which is they'll match up 100% deposit up to $600. So Carl Frampton and Jamal Herring are fighting this weekend. And if you're interested in making a bet on bet99.com, use the code BOXING99. They'll throw in a little bonus there. And that's the fight I want to get to, gentlemen. Frampton and Herring. Frampton wants to try and move up. For Jamal Herring, the southpaw style, I think is going to be a trouble skills-wise for Frampton to deal with. And I also think the size is going to be a difference. I don't know if you agree or not, but I think actually Jamal Herring is a bit of a favorite going into this matchup against Carl Frampton.
Well, I've got my thoughts on it, but I'll speak on it first. And Scully, I'm just going to speak for everybody who's watching it, who's watching this, who's yelling at you right now, saying, "Get your finger off your camera." It's been there for how long have we been doing this now? So I'm just going to speak for the viewing audience who's yelling at you right now. So I'll let you speak on Frampton and Herring, because I have my thoughts on this as well.
Well, I'll be completely honest. I really have not seen that much from Herring since he was an amateur. I know he was a very good amateur, had very good speed, as I recall, but I haven't seen that much of him as a pro to really comment. But I like Frampton anyway. Like, I'm a fan of his probably. Just based on
because you're Irish.
Yeah, maybe that too.
Because you're Irish.
But based on the little bit I know, I mean, in my opinion, probably doesn't even matter because I haven't seen enough of Herring, to be honest with you.
Okay, well, here's my take on it. When Carl Frampton came on, and I've known Carl since the amateur days, and when he beat Leo Santa Cruz, I thought this kid, he went into the States, fought him and beat him, and he looked good doing it, like he was a real menace. He was a miniature, strong guy who took it right to him, and great fight. Even the rematch was a great fight that Santa Cruz ended up winning, but just a really good fight. And I thought it's going to take a hell of a fighter to beat this guy. Then he, I believe, if I'm not wrong, Matthew, you can correct me by checking the record, but then he suffers that defeat against Josh Warrington.
That's right.
In which, was a surprise shocker. No one expected that to happen. He's a heavy favorite going in, doesn't end up looking as good as he was expected to look, and loses the fight. And you say, it's not the same Carl that fought Santa Cruz. Fast forward ahead to Jamal Herring in his last outing. The commentators on TV were saying he quit in the fight, like he just didn't look like he wanted to be there. And he was bailing, which I thought was really cheap shot against the guy. I think that was unmerited because he's always conducted himself with such class and he's worked hard in the ring, doing what he does. And, for them to say what they said about him, I thought was completely uncalled for. But, he didn't look the best that he should have looked in that fight. And now you've got both of them going to meet each other. And this is what we said earlier about the interest in boxing and why people care about fights. It's when you don't know who's going to win. Even if they're not at their best, both of them could be not at their best. So who still has a little bit more of their best left to win? And that's what makes it interesting. Because if you had a Carl Frampton who was coming off of the win against Leo Santa Cruz, going against Herring, who's coming off the last fight where he did not look as good as he was supposed to look, Frampton would be the heavy favorite, and you'd say, Frampton's got this, but now you don't know. And you want to see has it helped him? Has this time off helped Frampton? Has he rejuvenated a little bit and got comfortable with his new trainer and, to take this on and take this fight on? So that's why this match is so interesting. And it's another case of two of the best guys fighting each other. And I like that. And I think that that's a great matchup and we need more of that stuff. And, tip of the hat to both these guys for fighting each other. And I will certainly be watching with great interest because to me, that fight, Scully, would have been a Saturday afternoon CBS Sports Spectacular or Wide World of Sports type fight where we're watching, like everyone's watching. Yeah.
For free.
For free.
Well, that's why Russ, another case of the best fighting the best. I was going to say a refreshing case of some of the best fighting each other because we don't see it enough. And that's why I think it's appealing. And for Herring, he's coming off a disqualification win against Oquendo. Look, he like you said, he's going to be looked at as the lesser pedigree than Carl Frampton, clearly. But at this stage of Frampton's career and with the size difference, that's why it's close to an unpredictable result. And when two elite fighters or near elite fighters face off with a result that's near 50-50, that's when, like you said, it's the best boxing night. The intrigue of knowing anything can change. And even when Valdez fought against Miguel Burchell not that long ago, that was one of those fights in the lower weight classes that you could really get excited about. And I think this is the case this Saturday as well.
And it's the classic boxing matchup of the tall, lean, skinny guy against the short, stocky powerhouse. That's the quintessential matchup you make in boxing based on the style you like to see and who's going to win and come out on top. So it's a contrast in styles against two gifted guys that are going to leave a bit of themselves in the ring, I think, Saturday night.
Any round table gentlemen here before we call it an evening? I know that in the heavyweight division, something we can get to eventually. Of course, there's going to be plenty of topics, but Andy Ruiz against Chris Arreola. I like Andy Ruiz if he's serious about being in better shape, like he's been stating, and that he's been losing a lot of weight, and he's training in the Canelo camp with the Reynosos. I think Andy Ruiz can be a very dangerous heavyweight if he's actually taking his training camp seriously, because he has some of the best moves of any heavyweight that size, and the hand speed, Russ. I think really, and Scully, I don't know if you agree, but that fight has intrigued me. And I think Andy Ruiz beats a Dillian White that defeated Povetkin. And Dillian White presents challenges as a top 10 heavyweight. But I like a guy like Andy Ruiz to make, to make some noise and defeat Chris Arreola if he takes his training camp seriously.
Andy Ruiz, to me, is a very talented heavyweight that, like you said, if he just disciplined himself to just being a serious guy training, he has all the tools in the world. He's tough. He's got skills. He's got speed. He can box. I mean, he is a complete package. And if he's down there, and again, Reynoso, if they're making him train and lose weight and then start to build and look like a fighter and take it seriously, that you really want to be a somebody and not just a tourist, because professional boxing lately has turned into the new advanced form of amateur boxing, right? People are finding it, they don't want to go through the trials and tribulations of amateur boxing and go through tournaments and fight tough guys. They say, oh no, I got my Facebook fans, they're going to come and watch me fight. I'm turning pro. Everyone turns pro, and we let anybody turn pro, right? But if he takes it seriously like a fighter, which he had taken up until the second Joshua fight, the guy was legit. He can be a real major force to be reckoned with. No, but he's going to be a guy that people are going to stay away from. And I remember saying, when they switched opponents on Anthony Joshua, I had a bad vibe immediately, because you picked the one guy that can really fight. He's not just a big guy. He didn't come from kickboxing. It wasn't a fabricated opponent. This was a legitimate guy who had an amateur career, Olympics, national team. He was a real fighter. I said, you just swapped on 3 weeks notice or whatever, an opponent for a better guy. Usually you get a weaker guy. You got a better guy, and he proved just how good he was against Anthony Joshua.
Right. Did you ever see, on a related note, did you ever see the video of him as a young kid, like around 13? And I believe it was Ellie Seckback who interviewed him when he was a kid. And Ellie put the caption underneath on the screen. He put "future heavyweight champion," and he interviews him. And he's like, I'm here with young Andy Ruiz. How old are you, Andy? And I think he was like 13. And they were like, I'm going to be heavyweight champ one day. It's on YouTube. You should check it out. It's pretty amazing.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
I have a lot of respect for those kind of guys who came through the ranks, went to the nationals, suffered defeats, went to the junior, to the JOs, went to the nationals, fought, tried out for the Olympic team, went to the qualifiers, went to the Olympic trials. Some made it, some didn't, and then said, I'm turning pro. And now the same thing in women's boxing. Now everybody just turns pro. Everybody's a pro. Everyone fights for a title. In 4 fights, they're fighting for world titles, and they get beat in world title fights, and they can't fall out of the rankings because there's nobody else to put there. There's just not enough guys. Like, it's crazy. And I think we need to get back to that, this business that anybody is allowed to turn pro, and I think, the case of Robinson, what's his first name, Matthew? The kid that fought Paul on the Triller card? Yeah, the fact that he was given a license to fight professionally defies the need for an athletic commission that's supposed to accord you this license. Because in any other sport, when you say you're a professional, even as a pool player, Scully, when someone says they're a professional, it's because they're really, 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 really good at what they do. Right. Boxing's the only sport that doesn't mean that.
Nate Robinson is a professional fighter. Think about that. Nate Robinson is a professional fighter. He can tell people, I'm a professional fighter. A professional in itself, I mean, if I hire a professional painter to paint my house as opposed to my friend, I'm going to get no paint on the edge. I'm going to get everything perfect. And professional boxing, professional athletes are supposed to mirror that level of competency. And you see guys, I remember one of the first pro fights I ever went to. I was a kid. I didn't know any better. I saw this fight. I thought, and you know the guy, you know him, Jake the Snake Riley. Remember Jake the Snake? He was on the first show I ever went to. He came out. I thought after the second round, I thought it was like some kind of halftime show that they did on pro cards. I didn't think he was a professional because it was such a comedic sight. And he was a pro, and mind-boggling. So we have some issues there, and a lot of guys, they carry, even guys that are decent amateur, but they turn pro because they can, and so they work their way up, but they're not getting better as they get older. They're not getting better, so they're still at the same level as when they turned pro, which was of an average amateur locally. And now they're a pro, but yet they can work their way up. And next thing you know, they're on ESPN undercard, and they're on television, and people see them and they go, wow, the guy must be really good. He's on TV. Yeah. Well, that's not necessarily accurate.
Yeah. But you know what? I think if you really want to look into that, that goes, I think, right into the amateur program, where at one time when America dominated on the world scene, they're not even a blip on the world scene on the amateur stage. They're not producing those great fighters anymore. There's the nationals are not a meeting place of murderers,
Did you know? Listen, the nationals are going on right now. I don't know if you know this. I think I told you. They don't have regional tournaments anymore in the United States. No. Do you know that? You don't have to qualify to go. There's guys there with 5 fights at the nationals. That's insane. That's crazy. It's messed up.
I wasn't always in agreement with the regionals, although I know that it was the only way you could do it. But, getting out of the region where New York State was harder than, or just as hard as winning the nationals. Yeah, and some guy comes out of Milwaukee and it's a walk,
Listen, Region 5 in Michigan, right? In 1988, in Region 5 at 165, you had Darren Allen, Fabian Williams, Cotty King, and Joe Lipsy in the region. Just to get out of that region, you had to go through these freaking animals. I mean, it was insane.
So I think with not having that depth in the amateurs, it has to translate into what you're going to see down the road in the pros. And right now, if it wasn't for all those fighters that have come from the Eastern Bloc, who weren't there before, there would be a massive void in boxing right now. I mean, if you look at all the fighters that are dominant from the Eastern Bloc, whether it's Usyk, Lomachenko, Triple G, Janibek, who else am I missing? Beterbiev, who else? Yeah, you look at all those guys and the up-and-comers that are coming. If they weren't there, the divisions are empty. Like there's just there's no bottom feeding happening where guys are coming up through the amateur ranks, good fighters, and making it interesting. It's not there anymore. North America is not producing that. It's not happening. The UK is doing better, but boy, I think we have to seriously look at what we've done to the amateur program by leaving amateurs in charge, and look what it's done. And it affects the pro game down the road. And so now the pro game has become the new amateur game. Everyone turns pro. I can turn pro. They got fans. They got a fan base. They said they can sell tickets. Okay, no problem. And that's what they all want to do. And of course, most importantly, they have their own logo. See, they got their own logo. That's very important in turning pro. Before you've even had a fight, that you have your own logo.
Of course.
Listen, we're in strange times. We're in times where exhibitions and YouTube stars are taking over the sport in some instances. It's not like it used to be, but fortunately, I hope the fans who tune in to another edition here this week of Calling Russ Anber, and with the course, always welcome guest, Iceman John Scully. We get to talk, and I think we get to, appeal to a certain fan base that still wants to see the sport of boxing be what it can be and not just a circus act. So, gentlemen, any final thoughts here as we approach the hour mark of the show?
As we thank Scully, we should also thank his finger for having played a role in this podcast as well.
My finger's famous now.
Yeah, yes, it is.
Yes, we have a logo. We have a logo for Scully.
We have to get you a logo.
Take care, gentlemen. Always a pleasure.
All right,
All
boys.
right, guys.
Have a good one. All right.
See you guys.